forward for each of them to really begin to move on to the next chapter in their healing. Christian and I have talked a lot in preparation for this case, and a big part of our approach was we wanted them to know that we believed in what they were saying, that there's a purpose and that there will be justice. And our hope is today that they can begin to find that little bit of faith and justice, that they can begin to move forward to heal, because this is not the end for them. And they have a long road ahead of them, and we're hopeful that this is part of it. Having the opportunity to hold Kevin Monahan accountable. I stood here and I think Mr. Mulholland asked the question, what do you hope? What's your promise? And our promise that day is the same as it is today, is to seek justice for Kaylin. And we couldn't have done that without the kids. And for those of you that were in the courtroom on that Thursday, to listen to them tell their stories and endure cross-examination. It's an amazingly difficult task. But in the midst of everything that had happened to them, they had the wherewithal to share what had happened. The neighbors, these kids, y'all know, they feel responsible. And because our neighbors in Washington County were willing to get involved, those kids know, or they'll have a basis to know that there's nothing that they did that was wrong. Because, adults tend not to believe kids. And so it was really nice for them to have people that could say to them, you were right, you did nothing wrong, you were just lost. Kelsey Carpenter, the story's not complete without our 911 call center. She helped diffuse a situation that could have been very dangerous. And yet her ability to respond to off the cuff, really, and go with a story that the defendant was giving her helped keep the situation calm and end the way it did. For those of you who cover Washington County, we've had too many of these tragedies, too many of these big cases. So I am becoming a bit of a broken record here, but an inevitable question will be, who do we thank? Whenever Senior Investigator Spezio shows up at a significant crime scene and needs help, he calls the state police. And the state police, no matter the time, day or night, they don't ask why or how come. They say how much, how many. And this is a perfect example. When we were compiling our discovery requirements, there were over 40 members of law enforcement that showed up. The state police sent the FIU, FIC kicked in, the crash reconstruction unit, major crimes, computer crimes. They all just show up, and that was 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. You heard the ones that testified, none of them were working, but the call goes out and they all show up. And then lastly, certainly, then I'll take whatever questions you have. None of this is possible without really an incredible prosecution team. Y'all got to watch Christian in the courtroom. His calm presence, his demeanor, his grasp of the facts and the law, and just the way in which he conducts himself. And so I know Christian's here. I made him come because I wanted to thank him publicly, because it just doesn't happen. You just saw how amazing he is. But there's a huge team behind that as well. We're a small office. Stuff continues to run. But we had the kids that were in the vehicles. We had Kaylin's family. Robin runs our crime victim office with Laura and Emily. They've been available for them day and night. They have their personal cell phone numbers, and none of this matters if we're not able to help the victims begin to understand the system and what the next weeks and months are going to be like. And they've been there every step of the way, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank them. And then lastly, there's a whole lot of people that contributed to managing the discovery, but Kim Little and Vern Bosley, they marshaled over 3,500 pages of discovery. And that's an awful lot of information to get into a usable form that we can turn over. So really, I just wanted to thank them. I appreciate the indulgence, and I'll answer any questions you have.
Tony, much of the nation was watching what was happening in this courtroom here in Fort Edward. What message does this send to this community and to the world, this verdict?
Well, I hope it sends them a message of hope, right? That there's people that are willing to be involved and step up. Whether it was the neighbors who called 911, who are bearing the tragedy for the kids, right? That they did nothing wrong. And I hope it gives them hope that the system works. We have to be patient. We have to realize that Bad people do bad things, but when they're held accountable, the system works.
Tony, I don't think I've ever seen a closing summation that took more time than the jury took to deliberate. Have you seen a murder case where a verdict came so quickly? And what do you think that says about the way your office and Christian presented the case?
Our responsibility, at its core, is to take the facts, present them to the jury in an understandable fashion, and then be able to wrap a bow around it, right? And so what you saw was the efficient action and the hard work. I mean, that's hours and hours and hours of work to do that. I think this is a case, though, where the facts really spoke for themselves. And in this opening, Christian talked to the jury about it's going to be bit by bit, right? Maybe if you're married to a quilter, you would say it's making a quilt, right? You'd get all the squares together. Those are your facts. But it's how you put the squares together as to whether or not you get the result that you've identified in this particular case. And because Christian was able to take all of those facts, work with all of our witnesses, and have them be able to tell their story of what happened to them, but then turn around and take 2 weeks of that information and knit it together, stitch it together for the jury, there really wasn't another verdict that I think would have been appropriate given all of that. But they did their job. They were a couple of hours of, but they'd had it for 2.5 weeks. So,
Tony,
I think they spent that time.
Did you have an opportunity to share a moment with the Gillis family post-verdict?
We did, and today is certainly a difficult day. There's relief that the system works, that there's justice for Kaylin, and so that's a good part of the day for them. And the bad part of the day for them is they're going to walk out the door, and they're still not going to have Kaylin. And so, those emotions will pull on them. But I really think today, for them, they've known that Christian and Laura and Robin and Emily and I and everyone in the office have believed in them, have believed in the kids, and believe in justice. Today, they have the realization that 12 strangers did as well. So I think will be a good part of the day for them.
Mr. Attorney, if you mind me asking, it seemed that the verdict came back right after that note when the jury asked about Mr. Monahan's use of his gun to shoot small animals and hunting. What do you think that note told the jury? And it just seemed like once they had the answer to that, as well as the difference between the two charges, they came right back.
I think more importantly was the question on the law. I do think back to something you asked as far as the effort at wrapping all of the evidence together. One thing, there was no elaboration, no exaggeration, no manipulation of the facts. It was just a sharing of what the facts are, comparing and contrasting the two stories, and the jury had that. I think the jury wanted to hear what is the core difference between murder, which is really acting with depraved indifference to human life at the end of the day. I think that's what they wanted to hear. Is that the difference, the core difference between manslaughter and murder? And there was no question in our mind, and I think hearing that was the key for them is, okay, it is the depraved indifference. I think the other portion of the factual readback, I wouldn't want to speculate what a juror or jurors were thinking and asking for that. It wasn't something we had highlighted in our closing, so obviously it was something they heard. Maybe a couple people heard it and a few didn't, and they just wanted to confirm that was what they'd actually heard.
You mentioned Jinx Monahan. Can you talk a little bit more, when you first opened just now, you said you wanted to hold Kevin and Jinx Monahan. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think if I said that wasn't what I meant to say. What I meant to say is what they did that night was wreak immeasurable horrors on these families. The accountability, criminal liability. We spent a lot of time on this case long before charging, going to the grand jury rather, and there was no evidence to support criminality. But as you heard summarized today, some of the kids testified. She was there, she was present, and the only inference that we could draw from that fact was they didn't talk about what had happened on the porch because she stood there and watched what happened on the porch. That doesn't make you criminally liable. But I also have a strong moral sense, and I think she had a moral responsibility that she chose not to exercise when that opportunity was present. And she could have told Kelsey. I mean, you guys saw Kelsey, right? Talk about an unassuming, soft-spoken person, unless she's trying to help save a life. and then she's very powerful and driven. So, you know, there was plenty of opportunities that she could have shared what she saw, and she chose not to.
Given that Monahan certainly could not change his actions on April 15th, do you think there would be a different outcome today if he had been more truthful when he was first encountered by authorities and on the witness stand?
Well, he chose not to, so I wouldn't speculate whether or not he even had that in him to do that. I think we saw who he is.
What sort of sentence are you seeking?
So the maximum on the murder is 25 to life. We will be asking for the judge to impose the maximum sentence. The reckless endangerment for the kids, because it's the same act, that is a concurrent sentence. So that won't add to his length of time. The tampering is a separate transaction and occurrence, meaning he took those steps after he had shot and killed Kaylin. So we will be asking for the maximum there. It's an e-felony, so it's 1/3 to 4, but we will ask for that to run consecutive as well. Ultimately, you know, the Judge Michelini will be the one that has to make those decisions. But I am certain, you guys all saw how Christian does with his cross-examinations and his closing. His arguments for sentencing will be powerful. I imagine, you know, the victims, it gives them an opportunity to share who Kaylin was. You know, we didn't get to hear that, and that's an important part, and we shouldn't. But they'll get to share that on March 1st. So I think that'll be, you know, a strong day, and then the judge will have to make his decision. And you know, I trust the juries. I trust the judge. You know, I don't get to control them, so that's stressful. But you know, we trust that they'll do what they think is right and impose a just sentence.
I'm sure you're expecting the defense counsel to appeal the verdict. I know they raised a bunch of different points during the motions for like mistrial, and you went through what testimony to come in. Are you ready, expecting that?
Oh, sure. I would have told you that at 7:30 a.m. on April 16th when I was talking to law enforcement at state police about what charges we were going to be filing. I would have said no matter what, they'll be appealing. So, but yeah, I would expect them to. I think the judge, though, did an outstanding job of protecting the record, kept a clean record. And, you know, and really, Attorney Frost, he shows that you can be a zealous advocate without being a clanging cymbal or, you know, banging drum. You know, he worked hard for his client, but he also contributed to a smooth and efficient trial, even though it took 2.5 weeks. So.
Do you think you mentioned it during his closing, it almost seemed like he felt he needed to sort of address his own path of defending his client. He sort of, you could say, muddied up the kids a little bit when he asked them questions about the substances in the car. What did you think about that? I mean, him asking that questions, and do you think that maybe that didn't resonate with the jury?
I'll answer that two ways. As an attorney, he has a job to do. He's got to represent his client. As part of that is making sure that the police didn't overstep their boundaries and make sure that we're held to the very high standard that we're held to. So he had an obligation there. As a parent, I take a different view. And, you know, that the presence or not of that had nothing to do with what those kids observed. And so I would imagine that also had an effect on people in the jury. But he had a job to do, and he did it in a way that I think maintained the integrity of the profession, but at the same time ensured zealous representation of his client.
It looked like all the kids were there when the verdict came down.
Yes, that was their friend. I mean, remember, this is someone that was their friend, that they watched an unimaginable action occur, and they were a part of it. And then they had to be part of telling that story. And so it was an important part for them today, too, as much as it was for Andy and his family, but for the kids and their family to be able to be there to watch this part of the conclusion, you know. And then there's another chapter on March 1st, but you know, I think it was important for them to be there. And you know, they also showed great self-control, because there was a lot of things that they would like to have been doing today in that courtroom when the verdict was read. And for a group of young kids, I think you kind of saw who they are, right? They're respectful. They're all unique, but they were also respectful of the setting they were in. I would imagine the reaction right now is a little different. But, all right. Well, I thank you and
Can we
appreciate
hear
it.
from Christian, too? Christian, do you mind?
That's his call.
Christian, what was your reaction? What was your reaction when that verdict came in under 2 hours?
Thankfulness. Straight thankfulness. We're talking about trying to ask 12 people to determine what the truth is, and I believe they nailed it, that was the truth, and I was thankful for that.
Did you have an opportunity to speak to the Gillis family?
I did.
What did you share, if you don't mind, Christian?
To try to give them the direction for how to work towards hope. You go through something like this and there's despair, and you're searching for something to give you direction. And so in whatever ways that I can try to help them see that there is a path to hope, that there is a greater hope than what we can see here. If this wasn't an outcome like this in this case, that would just increase 100-fold. So my hope is that they see a path to reach hope, a hope that is given to us from above.
Do you suppose, and I know it's difficult to get into the minds of a jury or a juror, do you suppose that they couldn't reconcile the lies he admitted to with then saying, I'm telling the truth now on the witness stand?
Oh, sure. I imagine that has to be a very obvious thing. Again, not getting into their minds, but that was something that you couldn't reconcile, how he could lie in one instance and give a completely different version of events on the stand, and then ask them to believe him now.
Were you at all surprised by what their defense became?
No.
That the gun was dropped, and once you got the tests back from the New York State Police lab, did you think, okay, this is going to be their defense?
No, I knew that was going to be their defense on April 16th. And I knew that no matter what the results of that drop test were, that this trial was going to be exactly what it was.
Really?
Yes.
Had they intimated, had they implied that there were nails on the deck at that point? Or?
I've been a defense attorney for many years, and if I had to take a look at the facts and try to find out what might be argued, that was the only argument.
Christian, in the courtroom, you wear the hat of a prosecutor, but I know that you were also a parent. And I can't help but think that in the back of your mind, you have kids in the community, and perhaps you think that any one of your kids might have turned up the wrong driveway. Is that in your mind when you're prosecuting this case?
That's a hard thing to do. As a prosecutor, you got to balance a couple things. You have to balance sympathy, which you need in order to be zealous, and guard against empathy, which is what you're starting to talk about, not to split a fine hair on it. Getting into that circumstance is very difficult as a prosecutor. I think it gets you emotionally twisted up, and you can't see clearly. So if you can stay grounded in sympathy, you can stay grounded in zealousness. And so that's something I have to put out of my mind while I focus on advocating for what the truth is.
Do you think you're trying this case for all of the parents in Washington County?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think anywhere, really. Again, as Mr. Jordan had said, the case like this nationally has got to be something that the people know, that there are prosecutors that want the truth and hold people accountable, that they are desirous to make sure we have safe communities, and that those that do wrong won't get away with it.
And Christian, I want to ask you about the defendant's comments when he was on the witness stand. And you made mention of it in your summation that he was trying to start a quote-unquote a dialogue by firing a shotgun into the air. What could you say about that? What you think that, how far that went with the jury?
Well, my hope with that, and if you were there for cross-examination, is that the absurdity of something like that was just patently clear in the room, that you could hear a pin drop if anybody had any thought of actually considering that to be true.
The DA said you're seeking a maximum sentence for the murder conviction. Can you just go over how many years is that? 25 to life?
25 to life would be the high end, 15 to life is the low end.
Okay.
When you add in the tampering, it's possible he can get 1 1/3 to 4 consecutive to the 25.
Okay.
Right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
Well, I was not surprised because the evidence was so strong and the advocacy on the part of the attorney Robert was stellar, so I was not really surprised.
So, can you share with us at least where the case, from your perspective, is headed? Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
There's just no battery on this guy.
You represent.
What is it about?
We just had a family, tremendous work, stellar performance. Attorney's office phenomenal, and for the support that the whole community. Come on.
Plan now, are we gonna go?
I think we're 5:30.
In their shop.
Nah.
We'll talk to them.